people, we are, and I thank the majority leader for bringing this bill up. He and the Republican leader have put on the floor a piece of legislation that affects nearly every American family. Now, this won't have the fireworks that some things we do has, because we have a lot of agreement about it, which is one reason it's on the floor. It's gone through the committees. Senator Harkin and Senator Enzi have worked carefully with all the Republicans, all the Democrats on the committees, and many other people on a complex piece of legislation for a year to put on the floor legislation that would help make the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act a bill that's likely to succeed. We take for granted our medicines, Mr. President. During the Civil War, the Capitol was used as a hospital, this Capitol. 2,000 cots were set up in the House and Senate chambers and the rotunda. The first group of wounded arrived from the Second Battle of Bull Run and later from Antietam in September of 1862. Those soldiers didn't have the benefit of antibiotics or other modern medicines that we take for granted today, and that is why there was such a horrible number of deaths in the Civil War. Still, as the 20th century dawned, disease cast a long shadow over the United States of America. A child born in 1900 could expect to live an average 47 years. And infectious diseases took many children before they reached their teens. In 1900, pneumonia and influenza were the leading causes of death, followed by tuberculosis and diarrhea. Physicians had few weapons to fight diseases. The medicines at the time included such things as mercury for syphilis and ringworm, digitalis and nitrate for the heart, quinine for malaria, plant-based purgatives. For most of human history, diabetes meant death, but insulin was introduced in 1923 commercially, and within a few years, enough insulin was being produced to meet the needs of diabetes patients around the world. It is hard to remember this, but vaccines began to be commercially produced only during the time of World War I. And it was not until the time of World War II that we saw the introduction of widespread and effective therapies with the development and mass production of penicillin. And since then, the sky has seemed to be the limit. Half of Americans take at least one prescription drug every day. 1 in 6 take 3 or more, and many take over-the-counter medicines. It is a real miracle what has happened in terms of our lives with the introductions of medicines, and we rely upon the Food and Drug Administration to keep those medicines safe and effective, which is what this legislation is about. I would like to renew my compliments to Senator Harkin and Senator Enzi for bringing this bill to the floor in a condition where they have already worked out most of the issues. This bill is complex, it's long, it has 11 titles. It will help safe and effective drugs. It will make medical devices and biosimilar products get to market, and more important, get them to the market quickly so people who need help can use the medicines. We're reauthorizing 2 user fees. These things have absurd names, like the Prescription Drug User Fee Act is called PDUFA, and the Medical Device User Fee Modernization Act is called MDUFA. And there are 2 new ones, which are GDUFA and PSUFA. It's really absurd, and I promise never again to use those phrases for these user fee programs. But they're critically important programs that give the Food and Drug Administration needed resources to review new medically necessary products. For example, there's the Better Pharmaceutical for Children's Act. It's a part of what we're doing this week. I've worked on it, co-sponsored it with Senators Reid of Rhode Island, Murray, and Roberts, and I thank them for the ability to work with them on this. This makes permanent the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act, and the Pediatric Research Equity Act is reauthorized. One is an incentive, and one requires pharmaceuticals to, when they develop new drugs for adults, they figure out the effect that those drugs will have on children. Too often, we don't know the answer to that, and the drugs are either ineffective or can have bad results sometimes. This is a very important part of the bill. Another important part of the bill has to do with medical devices. The United States is a world leader in medical devices. In Tennessee, we have lots of them, especially in Memphis. We need to improve the regulatory process. There are many who believe the FDA is over-regulating medical devices. That has a negative effect on the industry's ability to raise capital, create jobs, doesn't make those devices available, most importantly, in the U.S. and in Europe. This will help address those problems. For example, it will allow customization of medical devices for small populations. That means 5 people or less without going through a very burdensome approval process. And it changes the humanitarian device exemption to encourage and incent the development of devices to treat patients with rare diseases. That would be groups of patients of less than 4,000 people. There's another problem that's addressed in this legislation. It's the generation of dealing with antibiotic resistance. We know there's a growing problem with resistance as bacteria continuously mutate and evolve in their resistance to the drugs and the medicines that we develop. And while efforts have been made to preserve existing antibiotics, drug development hasn't kept up with the pace. These changes will provide meaningful market incentives and reduce regulatory burdens. And in addition, I'm very pleased with the results of our work in drug shortages, on dealing with drug shortages. That is a part of this bill. It will give the FDA additional tools to help prevent drug shortages and require FDA to look internally at regulations to see if the FDA is making the problem worse. Senator Casey and I worked together on a review of federal initiatives to combat prescription drug abuse and to issue a report on that. Tennessee, our state, ranks second in the nation for prescription drug use. Our governor, Bill Haslam, and our legislature took action this year to deal with that. We intend to help them. In closing, I'd like to commend Senators Harkin and Enzi. I see the senator from Washington on the floor. I don't want to take much more time because I know she's about to speak. She's been integrally involved in the development of this legislation over the last year, especially the Better Pharmaceuticals and Devices for Children Act. I mentioned that a little earlier. It incentivizes drug users to study their products and how they affect children, and in return, they get to keep the exclusive use of those products for a little while longer. That means they don't go to generics quite as quickly. That has been tried in this legislation since it was first authorized and reauthorized, and it has worked. It has been a very good example of an innovation in legislation that has achieved a desired result. The Pediatric Research Equity Act gives the FDA authority to require pediatric studies in some cases, and then to do the same by promoting the development of pediatric medical devices. So the importance of the legislation is it takes a big step forward in making it clear what drugs that are created for adults will do when offered or provided to children. Currently, just under half of the drugs prescribed to children have been studied and labeled for children. But that's a significant improvement over where we were when these programs started just a few years ago. Children's bodies react very differently to medicines. Sometimes side effects are different. Physicians have to guess what dosages are appropriate, whether therapy that might be effective for an adult is also effective for a child. Sometimes there are examples of overdosing or previously unknown side effects. In one case in Tennessee in 1999, 7 babies were prescribed an antibiotic to treat whooping cough. They became so seriously ill, they needed stomach surgery, and the CDC, Center for Disease Control, later linked their illness to the antibiotic, which had never been tested in young children. Prior to the passage of these laws that we're working on today and reauthorizing, 80% of drugs used for children were used off-label. That was, we didn't really know how they affected children. Now we can use those drugs, half of our drugs today, safely and effectively because we do know that. So I'm happy to come here today to join with Senator Murray, Senator Harkin, Senator Enzi, Senator Reid of Rhode Island, Senator Roberts, to offer what I believe is a piece of legislation that affects every American family, that takes one more step in the dramatic story of how we have gone from a country with almost no medicines to a country where almost everyone takes some medicine, and a situation where the lifetime of the average American has increased from 47 years of age to its present level today. I see the senator from Washington on the floor. I want to recognize and thank her for her leadership on the legislation. Mr. President, I yield the floor.